Hi, everyone. You are currently looking at the Younger Writers program, short story writing. I am coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded, and I do pay my respects to elders past and present. And of course, if any Indigenous people are here with us today, thank you so much for coming. My name is Alison Evans. I live in Melbourne, and I am here with Ali Richards, and we're going to talk about short stories. Ali, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alison. Yes, I'm, like Alison, a fiction writer with short stories and one novel, and I'm also speaking to you today from Wurundjeri land. How are you, Alison?
I am good. Yeah, it's a quite a overcast day today, but it's quite warm, so I'm feeling all right. Yes, how are you going? Yeah. I'm just going to read out the quote that is our event brief. It's a quote by Neil Gaiman. It says, "Short stories are tiny windows into other worlds and other minds and other dreams. They are journeys you can make to the far side of the universe and still be back in time for dinner." I think that's wonderful. That's why I really like short stories as well, because they can be such a big idea, but it's only in a very small amount of pages. And I think that's why they're really, really hard to write. I was thinking about it because I write novels mostly, but I also really love writing short stories, but I find them really hard to get right, and I will often redraft them many more times than I would redraft a novel. How have you found your short story writing in your life?
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're kind of harder than novels, and they're harder to read than novels. I think also just as a reader, I think people say a lot the thing about short attention spans and how we should read short stories more, but I actually think that that's why they're less. I don't know if they're actually less popular now than they once were, but they're certainly harder to published and harder to sell. And I think it might be the attention span thing, because I think you've really got to concentrate in a short story, because sometimes the information you need will be in one word, and that will be the word that will make you understand the end or something. So it's so distilled that you've really got to, that there's nothing in there that's superfluous.
Yeah.
And of course, some novels are like that, but a lot aren't. A lot of novels that have a lot of, once you get the who, what, where, when, you can kind of cruise through the rest of it.
Like you could definitely skim read a novel, but you can't really skim read a short story.
And I think ending short stories is definitely just so hard.
Oh, yes, God. I feel like when I'm writing a short story, I will have the start and the end, but the end will always change when I'm as I'm writing the story. Like I find when I'm writing a novel, I know what the end is going to be, but with a short story, I think I know what the end is, and then it's never that. Yeah, so it's so hard to get right. Do you have any tricks for ending a short story? Or
I think I like to think of short stories kind of like songs, particularly like pop songs, and I like to think of them as having, like, they have a chorus, which I've never actually physically written a chorus in a short story, but in, say, like a song, there's like the verses, and then the chorus is like the central idea. And I sometimes, if I'm writing a short story, I try and think of what would the chorus be of this short story, like what is the central idea. And then I think by the end, something just needs to have shifted, and it might be something really small, might be something that happens, or it might just be something that you learn, but there needs to be something that's changed by the time you get to the end.
Yeah, nice.
And it's just always reading, trying to find that, trying to find where you can shift something. Yeah. What about you?
I really I love that. I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to write a short story at the moment, and I don't know. I feel I feel like you saying that chorus thing has kind of switched on a light bulb, and I'm like, aha, now I can do it.
Oh, great.
But yeah, I think I don't know. It's hard when you have a word limit as well, because you have to have the end by a certain time. And I think when I'm normally writing a short story, I won't like have an idea of how long it's going to be. It will just kind of, I'll just like finish writing and be like, oh, there's the end. Very good.
Yeah.
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 How did?
Sorry.
Oh, you go. You go.
I was going to say, because quite a lot, your stories tend to be relatively long. I think, do they, for short stories?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would think like 5,000 words would be long, and then short would be like less than 2,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the one I'm writing now is about 5,000, which is, I'm not sure if that's long. I find I write very short novels as well. Like my
Yeah,
novels are like 40 to 50,000 words. They're not very long. But yeah, I find I really like the space between 3,000 and 5,000 words for a short story. I think that's quite good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes I find with the opportunities, they tend to like 3,000 words. I don't know who started that, but someone started that. And then that's what you've got to try. And I find 3,000 really hard to rein in. I usually go around 4,000, I think. Yeah. So there's a question here. Can you tell us how you got started in short stories? Did you write them as a teenager?
Oh, yes. Would you like to go first?
Sure, because my answer is pretty short. It's no. I never wrote as a teenager. And actually, I was thinking about this recently because I read heaps as a teenager, but really not very many short stories. I think we did Alistair MacLeod when I was at school, and that I think that was the only short story. That's the only short story collection I can remember studying in English. So yeah, I didn't write when I was a teenager. I just read a lot, and then I started writing in my early 20s. I came up with an idea for a story one day, and that's when it started. Yeah. What about
so you started with short stories. That wasn't a longer piece?
I did, yeah. And I studied creative writing, and they very much encourage sort of start when you do a creative writing degree. I feel like they start with short stories as opposed to novels, which I think is a wise way to start, because I feel like once you've written however many short stories, once you've written more than one, you probably realize what your own personal cliches are that you will always lean into and always automatically go. So then you can notice your own patterns and start trying to change things up.
Yeah.
How did you get started?
I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure when I was a teenager, I really wanted to write a book, and I started a lot of books. And it wasn't until I got into fan fiction that I started writing short stories, or one shots as they're called in the fanfic world. And I think that's where I was like, oh, short stories are shorter, so I can write them quicker. And then when I finish something, it feels really good. And so that's kind of where my love of short stories started. And then as I kind of got a little bit older and I wanted to publish things, I found there were just more opportunities to submit short stories to places, and so that's where I started to direct my energy. I also went to study creative writing, and they encouraged us to write short stories, and they didn't want us to write genre fiction like sci-fi and all the fun stuff. And I was like, I'm going to write that anyway because it's fun. And that was where my love of short stories really started to grow. And I think when I moved into novel writing, I sort of forgot how much I loved short stories. And then it's only been in the last couple of years that I've really directed more energy into actually writing them and spending time with them, because I was kind of just writing them and keeping them as a first draft and being like, I don't care about that anymore. But now I'm finding that I'll write a short story and then redraft it over several months or a year, just to not constantly, but every couple of months I'll go back to it and work on it. And I just really love working like that. It's less intimidating than a novel, I think, even though they are harder to write.
I really like how with a short story you can sit down for a session of writing and work on it from beginning to end, and you can really feel like you're doing the whole cohesive thing each time. Whereas there is no way I could sit down and start working on my novel and go from the beginning to the end in a day. I'm too tired. Even if it was just a proofread, I probably wouldn't be bothered doing it. And for that reason, it's just a different thing, but you have to work on it in these little bits and pieces that I feel like it's not quite as satisfying as working on the whole.
Yes. And I think that kind of leads into a question from the chat. Do you recommend young writers start with writing short stories? And I think, yeah, definitely. Because you are seeing the whole story at once, it's a lot easier to, I guess, conceptualize in your head, and you can kind of hold the whole thing all at once, and you get the structure of that narrative arc, and you can really work on it and kind of perfect it. And like you said before, you learn what you really like to write. I really like to write about rain and also making tea, which those are my two things that I seem to write in every story. And as you write short stories, you really learn who you are as a writer, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I concur with everything you said. And I think that you can, when you start writing, unless you're one of those born geniuses, which I'm not, what you write is probably not going to be particularly good. And so that's freeing, though, in a sense, because you can write a probably fairly average short story, but you'll have really a fun time writing it, and you'll get to know your voice. And then you can write another one, and you can write another one, and you can write another one. And you will just develop your skills and get to finish things, which feels quite satisfying. Whereas I think if you were still in that really beginning stage where you're not just learning how to write sentences, then a novel is just such a huge undertaking. And if it's bad, it's going to feel so big and bad that it would probably be a bit intimidating, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I forgot what I was going to say.
There's another question here. What are your real back to basic top tips? How do you get started?
I usually, what'll happen is I go on Pinterest a lot recently, so this is a new development in my in my process. But I have a Pinterest board that is just images that I I will like use for inspiration when I want to write a story. So like if I see a picture that just kind of stays with me and kind of makes me pause for a bit, I'll add it to that board. And I think finding visual inspiration is a new thing for me, but I find it really helps. Like I often with a short story, I will just have an image that kind of pops into my head. Like with the short story that I'm writing now, I was given like a basic prompt, which was set it in Australian landscape and make it horror. And I was like, okay, which is also still quite broad. And then I was just thinking I live in Footscray, and across the road there was a house. It was the only house on the whole strip. So it was just like a park, a house, and then park. And then last year the house was torn down. And in about a week, you couldn't tell there was a house there at all. Like the grass had just grown, and and that image, like inspired what I'm writing now. So I find even if you just like keep a journal of stuff that makes you pause and think about it, or just like the stuff that you can't stop thinking about, I find that stuff is really, that's short story material, I think. Yeah, so that's what I would recommend. Just like make sure you remember stuff that you notice and like keep it somewhere and use it as like a well to kind of tap into, I find is really helpful. Do you have any tips?
I really like the idea of having a Pinterest board. I might steal that actually. That's really
I have
cool.
like I have folders upon folders of Pinterest boards.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's that like anything that you're interested in and like an obsession or just something that interests you, just follow that interest. And it doesn't always mean that you're going to write the story about it that day. Like I had an obsession with Bindi Owen for 2 years before I wrote a short story about it. And I wasn't thinking
Yeah.
this was going to be material. I just was obsessed. So I just kept like consuming her, and that happened. But yeah, things you're interested in will always lead you there. And I have an app that I got sponsored. Like I got a sponsored ad for it, and it's called Bear. And it's similar to the Notes app in the phone, but you can give your notes little hashtags. So if you're working on something, and so then they file the notes all together. So I'll have like story idea 1, story idea 2, story idea 3, and my novel in there. So if I'm ever walking along and I notice something or I hear something and it's or whatever, I wouldn't have my phone in the shower, but when you just make it and then that thing, you're like, oh, that's how I'm going to end the story or whatever. If it's at a time where I can't sit down and write, I put it into the phone and log it all. I've got it.
How do you spell that? Is it BARE?
BEA,
like
yeah, Bear.
cool.
It's red and it's got a picture of a little bear on it.
Yeah.
It was so weird. It was like this sponsored ad that was like, pen your next bestseller or something like really cheesy.
Yeah. Ooh,
like,
bestseller, you say.
What's this? You mentioned word count earlier. It often feels like there is a bit of stick measuring overriding large word counts. That being able to write large word counts means you're a better writer. Do you think there's a stigma against short story writers of fiction because they don't meet this large word count? Interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting. When I was quite young, one of my relatives who is a writer was he's a novelist, and he was like, oh, I don't go for that short story thing. I think it's a waste of time. And I was like, oh, okay. It's like, all right. What do you like? I just feel like that's so sad because like the stories that do stick with me that I think about for years are short stories. And I think there is perhaps not I don't know. I guess I'm coming to it from a YA perspective, young adult, which is short story collections are kind of becoming more fashionable, which I love. I think it's great. But I think apart from anthologies, short stories in YA aren't really a thing. Like sometimes very popular authors will have short story collections come out, but they're not really perhaps as popular as they are in adult fiction. So I guess that's quite a limited perspective, but I don't really know what's happening outside of the young adult sphere. Have you found that? Do you know?
I definitely think there's stigma against microfiction. I think I've heard people who are writers say like, oh, it's so easy to write microfiction because you don't have to have the structure or whatever. And I think that's really incorrect. Alice Bishop, who's a short story writer, her book A Constant Hum has a lot of microfiction in it, and she said that a lot of the microfictions they started out as longer pieces, and then in the editing process they ended up going down to like 2 sentences or whatever, so it was still the same amount of work of the idea with those 2 sentences went into that. So I think microfiction, I don't think there's certainly stigma in the publishing industry with short stories because they say they don't sell as much. I feel like people have just been saying that forever, and it is. There's certainly people still buying them and reading them though. So I don't know the truth.
And I think like my favorite. Sorry, just before we move on to the next one, my favorite short story writer is Jorge Luis Borges, and he writes amazing worlds. And my favorite short story of his is literally a page and a half, and it's called Borges and I, and it talks about the public persona of him and the writer persona of him. And that's my favorite short story of all time. And I think being concise and really making sure that every single word is there for a purpose is really admirable. And I really like short fiction that is very short, and I really like short novels because I think it shows a kind of like you're really honing in on what you're trying to say. And I think that's really hard, and not everyone can do it. And when you can do it, I think that's my favorite thing in the world.
I really like how I love novels, but I feel like your favorite short stories stay with me for longer. I think they never leave the short stories that you love the most, and it's probably because my favorite short stories I've probably read them 10 times, whereas there's not many novels that I would have read 10 times, if any. How do you drive a plot forward? How do you set the pacing transition from event to event? I think it's just practice, this kind of question. Self-editing is just a skill that you just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it and following your instincts and reading a lot and editing your own work. I don't know if I have anything more specific than that, but I think how do you drive a plot forward? I think if you really question where the tension is in the story, that's what's going to push that forward. So you've got to find where the tension is, hone in on it and crank it up, and maybe loosen it, but keep fiddling with the tension.
I think it's really helpful to try and write your plot in 1 or 2 sentences. And if you can't, then perhaps you're still not sure what the story is. And because I found I've been writing a novel for about a year with a friend, and then we finished it, and then we were like, okay, let's write a summary. And then we were like, what happened? And I think that really showed me that really knowing what what you're talking about will help you in the editing process. And I think if you have that at the start, it will probably help. Or like, I don't know, I find that each story is different, which is kind of annoying because it's like I've written so many stories. Can't I just have the magic formula, please?
Yeah.
But I don't. And I think it will be different for every story. I often find in the first draft I write a lot of scenes, and then in the second draft and onwards I am just rearranging everything, kind of like a puzzle that you can put together in multiple ways. So I find like flashcards. I don't know if they're still called that, like just little cards where you can write stuff on and then like rearrange them on the floor. I find visually that's really helpful. And also I really like doing mind maps, just like putting in ideas and just words or character names and just seeing how they all connect on. I have a big A3 sketch pad that I use, and I find that that's really helpful as well. I think I'm more of a visual learner, which I didn't really realize until a couple of years ago. Yeah, that's how I would do it normally. Yeah.
How do you feel is the best way to go about getting your short stories published, collections or magazine submissions? I'm super interested to hear your thoughts on this because I know that you sell some of your work via your website.
Yeah.
And so I'd be interested to know what you think of sort of that model versus a more traditional model. And like, yeah, what you think of the two different ways.
Yeah, well, I guess those stories I had them published before, and then the publisher went out of business. So I just kind of have them on my website because I didn't really want to get them republished because I wrote them 5 years ago and they're not really reflective of who I am now. But like I've sold maybe 2. So I find, but also because
$1,000 or something.
Yeah. I just kind of, sometimes people will email me and be like, oh, is this available? And then I'll just send them the link. And I basically just have them there because I didn't know what to do with them. But I find collections or magazine submissions, I think the only collection I've been in is the Kindred Queer Stories for Young Adults book, which I was asked to be in. And other than that, my short stories I have sent to magazines or journals. And I think especially if you're under 25, VoiceWorks journal is really good. I've got one here. So this journal, VoiceWorks, is run by Express Media, and I love VoiceWorks. They publish people under 25, and every submission you will get feedback. And that was really helpful when I was starting out because I didn't really know where to get feedback from. And getting feedback from an editor or several editors is really helpful. So I would definitely recommend that. Also workshopping with online. That is the best thing, I think, in helping yourself and helping others, because when you're reading someone else's short story, you kind of are separated from it and you can see the issues of where perhaps it's not quite working, whereas that can be really hard to see in your own work. And I think by looking at other people's work, you can then apply it to your own practice. So I think that's a good tip.
Yeah, 100%. And there's usually, we both studied creative writing, but if people don't want to study, if you don't want to do a whole degree, I always recommend going onto your State Writers Centre website because they'll usually there's always a short story workshop. And even I think during the Melbourne Writers Festival recently, there was a short story workshop. Always things like that, which I love. Yeah, I just love doing. And I think for submitting my suggestion would be both collections and magazines, because it's so hard to get published. So
Yeah.
just throw them out everywhere. Everywhere that you think would be appropriate. Definitely some familiarity with the journals is good, to know what kinds of things they publish. Having said that, I think if it's really good work, everyone should want to publish it. I don't think that there's that much stuff that you'd think was, oh, this would be appropriate for that place, but not here. And I think when I was younger too, I used to get stressed when people said, oh, you should read all the journals so you know what to submit. And I was like, I can't afford to subscribe to all the journals.
Oh.
And so I sort of said, like, you should familiarize yourself with all of them, and just figure out, like an online subscription is usually a bit cheaper, or maybe you don't subscribe to any of them, but you buy one quarter and then one the next. And like, there's ways to be familiar with all of them without subscribing to all of them.
And also libraries will often have copies or digital copies in this COVID era. Yeah. And a lot of journals will have.
That's a great tip. I never think to go to the library for journals, but you're right, they're there.
Yeah, and I think state libraries will have everything published in that state. So the State Library of Victoria, that has every lit journal from the last however many years. So libraries are a really good resource as well. Yeah, there's a question. Is creative writing degree necessary for young writers? No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think the thing that I liked most about my degree was that it gave me 4 years to dedicate to writing. And I think I probably learnt more from from my own practice than I did from classes. I think it can be useful, and the classes can kind of point you in directions, but I find like a lot more than you think you do, especially if you read a lot. And it's just a skill that you have to keep practicing. Like, there's not a class you can take and then suddenly you'll be really good at writing. Like, you get good at writing by writing, and it doesn't matter if you're at uni or if you're teaching yourself or if you're in a group with some friends. Like, it's all good. And you just really have to find what works for you, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, there's no course you can take that then will mean that you will be a good writer afterwards. And there's nothing that we can say today that will mean that from then on you will be able to write short stories. It is just bums in seats or standing if you want to stand while you write. It's just doing the work. It's discipline. The thing I think that I got from my creative writing degree, and I get from attending events like this though, is that it motivates me, because it's really I get inspired to go back and work on my work after I've been to these kinds of events. So I don't think the creative writing degree is necessary, but I loved mine. I had really great teachers. I had, the reading list was, obviously there was stuff on it I didn't like, but I found some of my favorite authors via that. I met people. I just really enjoyed going to class. So it's not an outcome-based degree so much, the same way that something that's more vocational it is. But if you want to do, you're doing a creative writing degree for your soul.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I think that most of the stuff I learnt after my degree when I started writing a lot more on my own. Yeah. Are there any mistakes that people commonly make? What are they, and any tips for avoiding them?
I guess the first thing that springs to mind is that sometimes you read a short story and it reads like a first chapter of a book. And I think sometimes that works, but sometimes, like, they're the stories that I won't think about again. Like, I think if you want to write the first chapter to something, that's kind of like write that book. And I think being able to tell the difference between a short story and a novel is something that you will learn. And it's, I guess, other times you read a novel and you think this should be a short story. And I don't have any rules to kind of tell which is which. I find that when I'm writing, I will realize at some point, and then kind of then like follow which of the paths I think I should take, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think possibly something I noticed in work that I've read from more beginner writers is if you're assuming that your reader is less smart than you or your characters, or that things are being that they can't read between the lines or something. And I think if things are really didactic, I think that's probably a common mistake at the start, I think. Yeah.
I find that my first draft will be quite obvious in that way. And I think that's because the first draft is me telling myself the story, and then after that you get to pare back. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the beauty of first drafts, is they're awful. So but
Yes.
they're really fun to write, I find. So
Yeah.
There's a question here about resources for teenagers to get published and competitions. So we mentioned VoiceWorks, and Express Media generally, the organisation that runs VoiceWorks. They have a lot of opportunities for teenagers. And I believe Killy Darlings also now recently did a teenage writing prize, and they have a school program. Yeah.
Cool.
So Killy Darlings' website also would have more information on that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know any other resources?
Libraries generally will have competitions, or will advertise the council's competitions, I find. And sometimes they're judged by YA authors. Like when I used to live out east, there were competitions with Ashburton Library, whoever, I can't remember the council, but I think they did a yearly prize. And sometimes they will publish a mini magazine or something. So I find if you go to libraries, libraries also do lots of free workshops and things. I run a trans writing group for people under 25 through City of Melbourne Libraries with my friend Novosisin, which is really fun. I just love libraries. I think they have a lot of stuff that is free, and that's I think, especially if you're young, that's the best kind of resource, a free resource. Yeah. I think that's all I can think of. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right though. I often see, I think in the I did the Peter Carey short story prize earlier this year. I didn't win, but I was shortlisted, and I think they had several younger categories, like teenage, and then also even younger than that. So most of the big most of the short story prizes often will have the two separate categories. So I mean, following your library's social media, or trying to find those kind of organizations, sign up for the Express Media newsletter, it would probably help.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just getting my favorite short stories off my shelf.
That is such a great question, and I've got some here beside me. So I think the best short story I've read this year is the title story from Elizabeth Tan's Smart Ovens for Lonely People. Elizabeth is a short fiction writer based in WA, and this collection was published maybe a couple of months ago now, and it's really brilliant. very kooky, bizarre. The title story is a story about a person who gets an oven that has like an AI personality in it. There's also like a ASMR Olympics story, like some really kooky premises, but then they're just these heartbreakingly sad stories that are all about human connection stuff. I totally recommend that one.
Nice. I've got Kindred, 12 Queer Love Oz YA Stories. It's got 12 authors. I am one of them, disclaimer. But it's really varied and there's like a lot of different genres in it. I would definitely recommend that. Meet Me at the Intersection is another YA anthology, which is, again, lots of diverse representation. There's poems, artwork, short stories, nonfiction. That's really cool. Underdog is short stories by previously unpublished writers, which is, I think there are 12. I don't know. I think there are 12 story authors in it, and that was their first like official publication, which is really cool. And After Australia, edited by Michael Mohammed Ahmed, which is like amazing. It's I think 12 again writers who were asked to write something to the idea of after Australia and then what that means to them. And that's really good. That came out, I think that came out this year. That's probably my favorite anthology from this year. I really liked Omar's and Khalid's stories. They were the best ones, I think.
I haven't read that yet, but I purchased it after the Melbourne Writers Festival because I saw an event with Omar and Claire Coleman.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Her story is really good too, actually. Yeah.
What are some good websites for writers? Would you recommend Wattpad or Inkit? I don't even know what either of those are. That's bad.
I know I've heard of Wattpad. I know some people who publish on there, but I don't know. I haven't really been on a writing website in a long time, and when I did, it was all fan fiction stuff. So I don't really know. I think I might be too old.
I wanted to ask, what kind of fan fiction did you write? What was the?
Oh no, it's quite embarrassing. I used to write fanfic for the band Green Day.
Oh, that's awesome!
No, it's not. And then I wrote Harry Potter fanfiction, which was like a big part of my life, which I'm like kind of mourning right now. It's very confusing. Yeah, mostly those two. Yeah, but I think it doesn't really matter which website you use. I would say it's about finding the people on the websites. Because I made heaps of friends on like this Green Day fan fiction website, which is also a fan website. And some of those people I still know today, even though that was like 15 years ago. So I think it really just depends how you use it. Like if you're not enjoying it, don't do it, I think. And you'll find the things that work for you, I think. Yeah, I guess I mostly use Twitter, but I think Twitter is for old people now.
Yeah. I mean, Twitter, because you can speak to all the writers that you like, and they're there.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, I definitely think of that more as fun and casual and venting, and I 100% don't think of Twitter as being something I'm doing when I'm writing. I have to turn it off to write.
Yeah. I did find my writing group through Twitter. So
oh, that's great.
Yeah, and so that it's helpful for meeting people, I think, as well. Yeah.
So do you have any other like final sort of comments or central ideas or anything?
I don't know. I think I would recommend finishing something, and then it becomes easier to finish the next thing. And I think don't give up on yourself, because a lot of people will not understand why you're writing, and they might never understand, and that's okay, but keep going and you will find your people.
Yeah. I guess that's something we didn't explicitly chat about, but is, rejection. It is so hard to get short stories published in journals. It is so hard, and I've been rejected so much. But I mean, this is an old stat and it's anecdotal, but a friend of mine worked at Killy Darlings years ago, and it was back when they were still a print journal. And I asked her, so they would have 3 or 4 short stories per edition, and she said that usually 2 of them would be commissioned, and then if the other 2, they would usually be choosing that out of about 400. So it's a lot, and it's just it's just so hard. So there will be a lot of rejection. But I guess one thing I would suggest, and I guess this goes back to the question about submitting and publishing in those journals, is once you finish something and then submit it, work on something else. Because it's the best way not to think about the thing you've submitted. You're developing your craft and you're getting better. And then also what it means that if it is rejected, it'll be rejected either because they would, it wasn't the 2, it was really great, but they were only taking 2 out of 400 or 1,000 or however many, and they just couldn't take it. Or it's being rejected because there's something wrong with it. And if you've worked on something else in the meantime, when you go back to it, you'll have fresh eyes and you might be able to see, no, I think that this is pretty coherent, or you'll be able to see, okay, actually, no, I can see now that it's not. And it'll help you, be able to work on them and fix them some more.
Yeah, I think one thing that I did learn at at writing school, one of my teachers said every time she gets a rejection, she pretends that it was because something was wrong with it, which might not be true. It might just be because it wasn't a good fit or whatever. But every time she got a rejection, she would then work on that short story. And then if you've got, say, 10 short stories on the go at various stages, then you always have something to work on, and you can always be honing your craft and honing those stories, and just getting, like, the thing with writing is, even if you write a crap story, like, you are still becoming a better writer, like just through doing the motions and going through the process. I think no time is ever really wasted on writing. Like, I've written 5 novels that won't be published and probably will never be published, and none of that time was wasted, I think.
No, yeah, it's always it's not linear. So it's always growth. And I kind of like that I have more stories that have been rejected than I have ones that have been published. And it's just it's kind of a nice feeling that I've got this secret box of fiction, and
Yeah.
you've always got it there for yourself, so you can go
And
back
sometimes,
and work on it.
yeah, like, it's nice to have things that are just for you sometimes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they're failures or whatever. Like, yeah, not everything has to be published, and you don't have to want to publish everything that you write as well. Yeah.
100%.
Any last tips or thoughts?
Just have fun. I think as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Can also be fun.
Yeah, that's lovely. Well, I think that is a really nice note to leave it on. So thank you, Ali, and thank you everyone for coming and for your wonderful questions. please, if you have questions, you can always email me on my website, or we have social media, so you can find us there. And yeah, good luck on your journey. I think it'll be really fun. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Alison. It's been great to chat.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you.
everyone for tuning in.